Today, we are going to go over 10 tips that are crucial for all the Huntress players to know. I've gathered together a list of 10 important tips and tricks that you can immediately apply to your Huntress gameplay to improve, start winning more games, and start landing more snipes. These were some miscellaneous tips that I had left over from my other guides that didn't really have a home. If you haven't checked those out, make sure to give them a watch after this. In the background, you're going to see some footage from a fun game I played on stream against a team of 4 megs. And yeah, without further ado, let's hop right into the tips. And starting us off with something simple but very important, that is practicing good hatchet patience. Basically by this, I mean 2 things. Picking up your hatchets at the right time and then throwing them at the right time. Just because you see a survivor doesn't necessarily mean you need to pick up. Oftentimes, the opportunity, it just isn't there or you already missed it. By the way, that's why map knowledge is super important. You need to take into account the wind-up time, especially when you're rounding corners or when you get line of sight on survivors. Additionally, I'll often see a lot of Huntress players being way too quick to release their hatchets. By holding your hatchets longer, you're going to do a bunch of really good things. You're going to give the survivor more opportunities to mess up. Your hatchets are going to be fully charged, so it's going to be harder for the survivor to juke. And you're also going to learn a lot of valuable things about how they juke. You're going to see if they have a favorite side they juke to. You'll get a good idea of the timing of things. And a lot of times, if you just hold up the hatchet, survivors are going to put themselves way out of position under the assumption that you're just going to release from afar. People really don't expect it when you just approach and don't throw the hatchet. Alright, so the next tip here has to do with maximizing your efficiency in regards to reloading. This is primarily going to have to do with perks, so I'll just use barbecue for an example here to give you an idea of how you should be thinking. So let's say you down a survivor and you have 1 or 2 hatchets left. A lot of people are going to reload first and then hook the survivor, but I usually prefer to hook the survivor first, then try my 1 or 2 barbecue shots, and then reload. The idea here is you're going to be wanting to get your perk value, you're going to want to be reloading as few times as possible, and you're going to want to be starting the next chase with a full belt of hatchets. Alright, and tip number 3 is you want to be as unpredictable as possible. One of Huntress's biggest strengths is she could be a threat at almost any time and from most parts of the map. You want survivors to live in a constant state of fear. When you charge a hatchet, you want them to second guess whether or not it's for them, because doing so is going to increase the chances of them making mistakes even out of chase. It's a good idea to try and hide your perks so you can maximize their efficiency, because survivors are going to adapt. If you become complacent and start becoming predictable, it's very easy for survivors to pick up on this and turn the entire game around. Alright, and tip number 4 is to disrespect pallets, and this is especially true at the start of the game. You'll find at the beginning of most matches, the confident survivors are going to tend to greed the first pallet, and this is just so they can see whether or not you pick up and kind of gauge how skilled you are. If you run through this, you'll usually land a free hit, and this will immediately cause them to start second guessing themselves. And generally speaking, the less skilled survivors, they're going to tend to just instinctively throw the pallet, which just gets it out of the way quickly. The only time I really disrespect pallets is when I know I can still get a free hit if they decide to keep running. Tip number 5 is about making micro adjustments. Typically, if I'm trying to aim from long range or if I'm trying to shoot through a small gap, I'll tend to make my aim adjustments by strafing. If I tap A and D on my keyboard, I can make smaller adjustments much easier than I can by moving my mouse. I don't play on a console, but I'm gonna guess this is also true for controller. Maybe someone can correct me down below if I'm wrong. And yeah, this is also going to be really helpful for those of you who play on a super high sensitivity. Moving on to tip number 6, that is dedicate some time to properly learning hitboxes. I think this is a really valuable use of your time, just going around and shooting through different sized gaps. You'll learn how big a space there needs to be for a hatchet to fit through, and I think you'll find a lot of shots aren't as tricky as they look. Be aware though, certain objects such as hooks, lockers, and some bushes have notoriously bad hitboxes, so you might have to play a little different around those. I like looking for objects that are around survivor height, because you can usually catch survivors and clip them over the top of it, even when you can't see them. But if possible, looking to aim under objects is slightly more consistent because you'll be able to catch them even if they're crouching. All right, tip number 7, and I totally understand this one might be a bit controversial, but if you really care about winning, sometimes it's okay to M1. Now, I totally understand, and I absolutely respect the fuck out of those of you who only want to M2, but if you care about winning, sometimes the safer option's an M1. A good example of this is the tight circular loops that you can't throw around. If you pick up and read the survivor wrong, then they just gained another whole 2 or 3 loops around the object. Another good example is when the survivor's near like a pallet or a window and you only have 1 hatchet left. If you hatchet them first, then you have no hatchets to use after they reach safety. If you M1 them first though, then you have a chance to land a hatchet shot on them and confirm the down rather than just the hit. Tip number 8. Understand that Huntress is an extremely mental killer. There will be some games out there that tilt the ever-living hell out of you. Try to come up with a good way to mentally reset whenever you're having a bad game. Whenever I reload, I tend to remind myself that you're just not going to hit every shot and that it's okay to make mistakes. Survivors who notice you tilting or missing a lot will often get more cocky, and you can absolutely take advantage of this. Huntress has such a big snowball potential that almost no game is over until the bitter end. All right, and tip number 9, oftentimes the hard shots are actually the easy ones. Basically by this, I mean survivors are less likely to dodge or juke hatchets that they don't think you can hit. If they think they're safe, a cheeky hatchet can often catch them off guard. A great time to do this is when a survivor is near cover that you can just barely shoot over. Rather than dodging wide into the open, most survivors will try to dodge behind the cover under the assumption that you'll be less likely to hit them. If you can master your aim, this can be an extremely powerful tool that lands you a lot of free shots. Finally, for tip number 10, I thought I'd throw this one in there for fun. This is basically to help you more consistently hit those straight up in the air Hail Mary shots. The main idea is going to be you want to line up the shot first and then use your arrow keys to make sure you're looking directly straight up. Be aware of any trees or objects above you or the survivor that the hatchet may potentially hit. And if you release your shot at 0% power, you should hopefully hear a squish in about 4 seconds. And yeah, that just about wraps up my Huntress tips for today. I hope you all learned something valuable. If you made it this far in the video, make sure you drop a cheese emoji in the comments below. Feel free to sub for more Huntress tips and gameplay. Follow me live on Twitch, and yeah, have a good one, everyone.